Padilla asked Trump's OMB pick about a year of withheld community lending funds. Bipartisan letters from Congress had been ignored. Vought called it widespread abuse. Padilla called the abuse claim a pretext. Let's watch.
It's an articulate, diplomatic way of saying, yes, it's whatever the president wants. That's the objective here. That's your answer. And I'll advise my colleagues that if this rule changes, it's not a change just for the balance of this administration. It's a permanent change. And at some point, there will be a Democratic majority, and there will be a Democratic president in the White House with this rule change, if that's the road you go down. My second area of question is relative to CDFI funding. As bipartisan members of Congress have communicated to agency leadership over the last year, CDFIs play a vital role in delivering capital and financial services to communities and businesses that lack access to traditional lending. OMB's purposeful delay of these funds has created significant uncertainty for the organizations that serve as a lifeline and frankly do a critical job in boosting our economy. After over a year of withholding these funds and many calls from Congress, again, both sides of the aisle, OMB just recently released the fiscal year 25 CDFI fund awards. However, Director Vought, in his response to this committee's questions on the proposed cuts to the program for fiscal year 27, continued to make unsubstantiated claims of widespread abuse. I've heard you say it in this hearing. You're concerned about abuse. You're concerned about abuse. If there's unsubstantiated claims of abuse, you're making it up and using it as a pretext to hold much-needed funding, and clearly, increasingly, on a partisan basis. So I'll try to ask you again clearly, will you commit to ending OMB's interference with the fiscal year 25 CDFI funding of notice of funding availability, as well as the 26 apportionment, and ensure the timely obligation and disbursement of future funds as intended by Congress? Yes or no?
Senator, I appreciate the question. As you mentioned, OMB was conducting a programmatic review of the 25-26 CDFI funds. Those funds have since been apportioned, and NOFOs are moving out on them right now. So I commit to ensuring that the funds are spent in a responsible manner, and we will obviously be taking those steps to ensure that there aren't abuse in the funds, and we'll release them once those safeguards are in place.
Look, as you know, time is money, and so when there's delays in this funding, it undermines the economic benefit of these programs. And if there was a long track record of abuse, you can make the argument for additional review. But when they're unsubstantiated, it's uncalled for and damaging to the American economy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Duncan, thank you for being here. So in my lifetime, here's what's happened to the costs. When I went to college, it cost $200 to go to junior college for a whole semester and $255 to go to a whole semester of university, and you could take as many hours as you wanted, right? You could buy a home in the suburbs for $21,000, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath in a safe, nice suburb. You could buy a brand new car for $1,600. You could buy annual health care for a family of 4 for $700. So you look today, $25,000 plus for a family of 4 for health care. You can't hardly find a new car for less than $20,000. You can't buy, the article said that 242 home, or I think something like 242 cities in this country starter homes around $1 million. So do you think government's had any role in causing all this inflation?
Senator, appreciate the question and absolutely think government has had a role, and that's why the administration's deregulatory and spending agenda is so critical to getting these costs down, undoing the burdens placed on the American people by the previous administration, and continue to try to drive costs down.
So if so we now have we'll hit $40 trillion of the debt this year. So $40 trillion of the debt, $1 trillion a year of interest expense. We are running $2 trillion deficits. So if that doesn't change, if we don't get to a balanced budget and start paying down the debt, do you think interest rates are going to just, just like that go down, way back down again?
I think we certainly need to continue to address deficit spending. I think we set forward a framework on how to do it this past year through rescissions, keeping the discretionary appropriations in a fiscally responsible manner, and also delivering on the mandatory savings that we did in the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. So we need to continue to move forward that model. I think to the chairman's point and to Senator Johnson's point, attacking the fraud is really important in getting our arms around this spending and continuing to bring down costs so we don't have the debt burden and interest rate problems that you're referring to.
So our country, all of us, and our military is completely dependent on Chinese drugs, right? We don't, almost all the ingredients in generic drugs are made in China. There's studies out of University of Indiana that tells us how unhealthy these drugs are.
What made this Padilla exchange land was the specificity of the withholding. Senator Alex Padilla of California opened with a procedural warning about the Senate rules. He then pivoted to the substantive issue. The Office of Management and Budget had withheld community development financial institutions fund awards for over a year. Bipartisan members of Congress had sent letters asking for the release. OMB had only just released the fiscal year 25 awards. The pattern Padilla named is sustained delay against documented bipartisan demand. The Community Development Financial Institutions Fund is established under Title 12 United States Code, Section 4701 and following, the Regal Community Development and Regulatory Improvement Act of 1994. The fund operates within the Treasury Department. It certifies and supports financial institutions whose primary mission is community development in underserved areas. The statute is bipartisan in its origin. The implementation has been bipartisan in subsequent reauthorizations. The funding that was being withheld is congressionally appropriated through routine appropriations legislation. CDFIs deliver capital and financial services to communities and businesses that lack access to traditional lending. The communities served include rural farming areas, urban neighborhoods underserved by mainstream banking, tribal communities, and minority-owned small businesses. The CDFI funds certified institutions number more than 1,400 nationally. They include community development banks, credit unions, loan funds, and venture capital funds. The institutions are part of the working economic infrastructure in regions where mainstream finance has historically been absent. Bloomberg's reporting on the CDFI withholding aligns with what Padilla placed on the record. The withholding extended over a sustained period. Bipartisan members of Congress sent letters during the period. The letters cited specific operational concerns. The CDFIs themselves described their planning, their staffing, and their lending pipelines as compromised by the uncertainty. The eventual release of fiscal year 25 awards came after the operational disruption had already been substantial. OMB Director Russell Vought had cited concerns about widespread abuse in the CDFI program as justification for the withholding and for proposed cuts. Padilla's response was direct. If the claims of abuse are unsubstantiated, Padilla said, then the claims are being used as a pretext to hold up needed funding. The procedural craft of the exchange is that Padilla forced Duncan to either defend the substance of the abuse claims or acknowledge that the funding had been held without sufficient documentation. The Treasury Inspector General publishes regular oversight reports on the CDFI fund. The reports document the program's compliance posture. The reports identify specific issues where they exist. The reports recommend specific corrective actions. The reports do not, in the recent published record, document the kind of widespread abuse that would justify the scale of withholding the administration applied. Padilla's framing places the burden on the administration to either produce the documentation or modify the framing. The Treasury Inspector General reports on the CDFI fund are publicly available through the Treasury OIG website. The reports follow a standard structure. They identify the scope of the audit. They document findings. They recommend corrective actions. The administration would be entitled to cite specific IG findings in support of a withholding decision. The procedural question Padilla raised is whether the IG findings on the record support the scale of the withholding the administration applied. Beyond the withholding of fiscal year 25 awards, the administration's proposed budget for fiscal year 27 proposes substantial cuts to the CDFI program. Padilla cited Vought's written response to committee questions on the proposed cuts. The written response continued to make claims of widespread abuse without producing the documentation that would support the claims. Padilla's framing places the pattern across two separate budget cycles, which strengthens the inference that the abuse framing is, in his account, a sustained pretext rather than a documented finding. Padilla noted that the withholding was increasingly partisan in its operational effect. CDFI certified institutions serve a geography that includes major urban areas, rural counties with significant minority populations, and tribal lands. The geographic distribution of CDFI services is not strictly partisan, but the funding effect, when withheld, lands more heavily on geographies represented by Democratic members. Padilla's framing is that the partisan pattern of impact has become harder to characterize as coincidental as the withholding has continued. The Reuters reporting on the bipartisan letter campaign is documented in the Senate's outgoing correspondence record. Letters came from Republican senators in states with significant rural CDFI footprints. Letters came from Democratic senators in states with significant urban CDFI footprints. The letters cited specific institutions, specific operational concerns, and specific timelines. OMB's response posture, until the late release, was non-substantive. The bipartisan nature of the pressure strengthens the inference that the withholding was not a routine policy disagreement. Padilla opened the exchange with a procedural warning about a proposed Senate rule change. He described the proposed change as an articulate, diplomatic way of saying whatever the president wants. He warned his colleagues that if the rule changes, the change is permanent. There will be a Democratic majority again. There will be a Democratic president in the White House again. The warning is the kind of long-horizon institutional argument that senators of both parties have historically made when contemplating rule changes. The current vote will outlast the current majority. Senate rule changes, once adopted, are very difficult to reverse. They become the baseline for subsequent majorities. The recent history of the legislative filibuster's contraction illustrates the pattern. Each contraction was adopted by a majority that subsequently lost the majority. The new rule then operated under the next majority. Padilla's warning is a familiar one, but it is also an accurate one. The committee will reflect on it when the rule's vote comes. The current cloture rule, Rule 22, requires 3/5 of senators duly chosen and sworn to invoke cloture on most matters. The reconciliation budget process is the most significant exception. Carve-outs to the cloture rule have accumulated through both parties' tenures in the majority over recent decades. Each carve-out, in retrospect, has been used by subsequent majorities of the opposite party. The pattern is what Padilla was warning his colleagues about in the opening of the exchange. What is unusual about Padilla's 5 minutes is the combination of topics. The opening Senate rules warning and the substantive CDFI questioning are two different threads. Padilla wove them together because both relate to the durability of institutional decisions across changing majorities. Rules that change once tend to stay changed. Funding patterns that establish once tend to persist. The combination is the rhetorical signature of a senator thinking on long horizons. It is worth noting what Duncan could have said. If specific Treasury Inspector General findings supported the withholding decision, Duncan could have cited them by name. He could have explained the proportionality between the documented findings and the scale of the withholding. He could have committed to a more targeted future approach. He did not. He pivoted to forward-looking commitments. The choice tells the committee that the documentation is either not available or not yet developed. Padilla was the national voice for the CDFI questioning because California has the largest concentration of CDFI certified institutions in the country. The institutions serve agricultural communities in the Central Valley, indigenous communities along the coast and in the high desert, and underserved urban neighborhoods in the major metropolitan areas. The operational disruption of the withholding had a measurable effect on his state. The specificity of his framing reflects briefings he received directly from the affected institutions. The Washington Post reporting on the California CDFI sector documents the operational damage in concrete terms. Staffing decisions were deferred, lending pipelines contracted, some smaller CDFIs ran down operating reserves. The damage is measurable in the lending volume of the affected institutions. The damage was avoidable if the withholding had been targeted or time-bounded. The framing matters because it converts a Washington appropriations dispute into a concrete operational story with a measurable cost. What the committee will do with this exchange is mechanical. The transcript will be part of the formal confirmation record. It will be cited in subsequent appropriations conversations about CDFI. It will be cited in future committee letters when OMB withholding patterns recur. The procedural craft of getting specific commitments on the record when Duncan declines to make them is itself a form of building the record. The absent commitments are data. OMB withholding mechanisms are not unique to the CDFI program. The same procedural tools can be used on any grant program. The pattern of how the administration uses the tools and how aggressively will define the funding environment for a wide range of community-oriented federal programs for the rest of the decade. Padilla's exchange establishes one specific case study in detail. The committee's willingness or unwillingness to engage with that case study will shape similar future cases. So the final accountability question is the standard one. What was gained, what was lost, and who is paying the cost? The public gained a detailed case study of how OMB withholding has affected a long-standing bipartisan grant program with a concrete operational footprint. The public gained a warning about the durability of Senate rule changes from a senator thinking on long horizons. What was lost was the chance to hear specific Treasury Inspector General findings cited in defense of the administration's approach. The cost is paid by the communities the CDFIs serve. The committee can decide. The full Senate can decide.